The inventory was 43 pages long. Declan Ashby had read through most of it on the train from the acreage, the timber rights, the fishing weir on the eastern boundary, the contents of the wine cellar itemized down to the last bottle of port. He was thorough by nature and had made his money being thorough, and so he read everything, even the parts that were repetitive, even the footnotes. He almost missed it. It was on page 31, between an entry for a set of 12 silver candlesticks and a notation about a disputed drainage easement on the south field. A single line typed in the same plain font as everything else. One household dependent, female, currently residing in the East Wing. Status to be determined by new owner. Declan read the line twice. Then he read it a third time, because he thought he must have misread it. He had not misread it. He looked out the train window at the grey Scottish countryside sliding past and thought about what kind of man lists a person between the candlesticks and a drainage problem. He supposed he was about to find out. Aldenmere House had belonged to that kind of man. The house was larger than it looked in the photographs, which was saying something, because it had looked very large in the photographs. It sat at the end of a long gravel drive behind a stand of old larches, 3 stories of pale sandstone with a row of mullioned windows that caught the afternoon light and threw it back in pieces. The gardens were overgrown. The fountain near the entrance had stopped working some time in the past decade and was now filled with dead leaves and something that might once have been a bird. The housekeeper who met him at the door was a small, precise woman named Mrs. Tallow, who had worked at Aldenmere for 26 years and had the expression of someone who had outlasted several regimes and expected to outlast several more. "Your Grace," she said, though he had asked her twice already not to bother with that. He was not a lord. He had bought the estate at auction, and with it had apparently acquired the title that had come attached to the property by some legal sleight of hand that his solicitor had explained, and he had not entirely understood. He was a duke in the way that a man who buys a ship is a sailor. Technically, arguably, the East Wing, he said. "There's someone living there." Mrs. Tallow's expression did not change. "Yes, who?" She paused for just a moment. A very small pause, but he noticed it. "That would be Miss Weston," she said. "She has been with us for some time." "In what capacity?" Another pause. "She assists where needed." He waited to see if there was more. There was not. "I'd like to meet her." "Of course," Mrs. Tallow said. "I will see if she is available." He found this a strange thing to say about a household dependent, but he was beginning to understand that Aldenmere operated according to its own internal logic, and that Mrs. Tallow was its primary interpreter. He did not meet Miss Weston that first evening. He was told she had been occupied with something in the kitchen garden, and then that she was resting, and then that she had gone to inspect the roof damage on the north-facing storage room, which had apparently been leaking since the autumn. By the time supper was cleared away, he had given up for the night and gone to bed in the large, cold room that had been prepared for him, listening to the wind come off the hills and thinking that he had possibly made a very strange decision. He had wanted somewhere quiet. That was the simple truth of it. He was 41 years old, and he had spent the last 15 years building a business that now ran largely without him, and he had looked at his life one morning in his flat in Edinburgh and found it clean and empty and somehow embarrassing in its efficiency. He had wanted something that required actual tending, something with a roof that leaked and a fountain that didn't work, and 43 pages of inventory. He had not, specifically, wanted a person listed between the candlesticks and the drainage problem, but here he was. He saw her the next morning. He had woken early and gone down to the kitchen because he could not sleep, and he wanted coffee, and he did not want to ring for it, which still felt like a strange thing to do. The kitchen was large and cold and smelled of wood ash and the particular dampness of old stone, and it was not empty. She was standing at the long oak table near the window, copying something from a ledger into a notebook, her head bent and her handwriting small and precise. She was wearing a plain gray dress and had her hair pinned up in the practical way of someone who had stopped thinking about her hair years ago. She did not look up when he came in. "Good morning," he said. She looked up then. She had gray eyes and a composed, still face, and she looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they have been expecting and have not entirely decided how to feel about. "Good morning," she said. Her accent was educated. Not English precisely, but something adjacent to it. The careful vowels of someone who had been taught to speak a certain way. "You're Miss Weston." "I am." She did not add anything to this. He went to the range and found the coffee pot, which was warm, and poured himself a cup. "I understand you live in the East Wing." "I do. And you assist where needed." Something moved across her face. It was brief and controlled and might have been amusement, or might have been something else entirely. "That's one way to put it," she said. He sat down across the table from her. This seemed to surprise her slightly. A small adjustment in her posture, a careful stillness. He looked at what she had been writing. Numbers. Long columns of numbers, very neat. "What are you doing?" "The household accounts," she said. "They haven't been properly reconciled in 3 years. I've been working through them. Who asked you to do that?" She met his eyes steadily. "No one," she said. "I did it because it needed doing." He drank his coffee and looked at her and thought that she was not in any way he could identify what the inventory had suggested. Whatever a household dependent, status to be determined, was supposed to look like, it was not this. A woman with ink on her fingers sitting alone in a cold kitchen at 7 in the morning doing work that no one had asked her to do. "How long have you lived here?" he asked. "All my life," she said. And then she looked back down at her ledger, and that was apparently all she was going to offer. He spent the first week learning the house. It was more complicated than it looked, which was again saying something. There were rooms that had been closed for 20 years, with furniture still under Holland covers. There was a library with a catalog system that someone had started and abandoned somewhere around 1987. There was a walled kitchen garden that was half wild and half productive in a way that suggested someone had been maintaining it with care and without resources. Mrs. Tallow told him, without being asked, that Miss Weston had kept the garden going for the past 4 years. He asked Mrs. Tallow, carefully, what Miss Weston's position in the household actually was. Mrs. Tallow looked at him with the expression she reserved for questions she considered outside her jurisdiction. "She manages," she said. "Manages what?" "Everything," Mrs. Tallow said, as though this were obvious, and went to answer a telephone that he had not heard ring. He found himself watching Nora Weston. He told himself this was because she was anomalous, a variable he had not accounted for, a line item that didn't fit. This was partly true. She moved through Aldenmere House the way people move through places they know in their bones. Not like an employee, not like a guest. She knew which floorboards creaked and stepped around them automatically. She knew which windows stuck and which needed a particular lift and push combination to close properly. She knew, he noticed once, exactly which shelf in the library held the household maintenance records going back to 1920, because she went directly to it without looking. He had been searching for those records for 2 days. "Where did you learn to keep accounts?" he asked her one afternoon. She was in the library, which she seemed to treat as a shared space, which he did not mind. She looked up from the journal she was reading. "My father taught me," she said. "Your father worked here?" A pause. "He lived here," she said, and then she looked back at her book. He was beginning to understand that Miss Nora Weston parceled out information in very small, very deliberate increments, and that the increments were not accidents. The solicitor arrived on a Thursday. His name was Mr. Featherwick, and he was a small, round man who sweated lightly even in cool weather, and had the manner of someone who has been the bearer of complicated news so many times that he had made his peace with it. He came to finalize several outstanding matters related to the transfer of the estate, and he brought with him a leather case that he set on the table in the library with a particular kind of care. Declan noticed that Nora Weston was not in the library that afternoon. He noticed this because she was almost always in the library in the afternoons. The outstanding matters took 2 hours to work through. Most of them were ordinary. Adjustments to the boundary survey, a question about the rights to the fishing weir, a notation about a repair to the east wing chimney that had been promised by the previous owner and not completed. Declan signed what needed signing and initialed what needed initialing. At the end, Mr. Featherwick cleared his throat and opened the leather case. "There is one additional matter," he said, "which I was asked to raise with you once you were settled. It concerns Miss Weston." Declan set down his pen. "Go on." Mr. Featherwick removed from the case a folder of documents, and on top of the documents a sealed letter. The seal was old wax, cracked in one place, and bore an impression that Declan recognized from the estate's original crest. "The late Lord Aldenmere," Mr. Featherwick said, "was Reginald Weston, the 3rd Baron of Aldenmere, who held the estate under the barony title until his death 14 months ago. At the time of his death, he was in considerable debt." Mr. Featherwick paused. He had, some months before his passing, made arrangements to sell the estate and most of its contents to settle those debts. The sale was legal. The transfer was complete. "You are without question the rightful owner of Aldenmere." "I know this," Declan said. "Yes." Mr. Featherwick touched the sealed letter with 2 fingers. "However, before his death, Lord Aldenmere left this letter with my firm, with instructions that it be given to whoever purchased the estate, specifically regarding the matter of his daughter." The room was very quiet. Through the tall windows, Declan could see the kitchen garden, and in the kitchen garden, at the far end near the wall, a figure in a gray dress moving between the raised beds. "His daughter," Declan repeated. "Miss Nora Weston," Mr. Featherwick said quietly. "Who is, I should say, entirely legitimate. Lord Aldenmere acknowledged her in full. Her mother, who passed when Miss Weston was 6, was his first wife, married in Edinburgh in 1992. There is documentation." He tapped the folder. "All of it is here." Declan looked at the sealed letter. He sold the estate knowing she was living in it. Mr. Featherwick said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "Did she know?" Declan asked. "That it was being sold? That I cannot say." Mr. Featherwick gathered himself slightly. "What I can tell you is that Lord Aldenmere left specific instructions. He wanted whoever owned Aldenmere to know who she was. He wanted it on the record." He slid the letter across the table. "He also wanted you to hear it in his own words." Declan picked up the letter. The wax seal had been cracked and resealed, he noticed. Or perhaps just cracked sometime in the moving and the handling. He could not tell. He did not open it yet. "Where is she?" he asked. "Legally, where does she stand?" Mr. Featherwick folded his hands on the table in the way of men who are about to say something that is technically true and practically unhelpful. "She has no legal claim to the property. It was sold entirely and legitimately before Lord Aldenmere's death. What she has is her name, her heritage, her father's written acknowledgement." He paused. "And perhaps whatever you choose to do with that information." Declan looked out the window. The figure in the garden had stopped moving. She was standing very still at the far wall, and he could not see her face from here, but something in the set of her shoulders told him she had been waiting a long time for something. He could not have said what. "Thank you, Mr. Featherwick," he said. "I'll be in touch." He read the letter that night. It was 8 pages, handwritten, in the shaking script of a man who had been very ill for a long time. The handwriting started tightly controlled at the top of the first page. and loosened gradually as the pages went on, as though the effort of maintaining it had worn him down. Lord Aldenmere, Reginald Weston, wrote about his daughter with the particular guilt of a man who has known what he was doing wrong and done it anyway. He wrote about her mother, who had been clever and gentle and had died of a fever in the spring when Nora was 6, and about the years afterward, when he had kept Nora at Aldenmere because he did not know what else to do with her and could not afford to send her anywhere. He had taught her to manage the accounts because she had been better at it than he was at age 14, and because it saved him the cost of a secretary. He had taught her the estate records and the household management and the kitchen garden because these things needed doing, and she was willing and capable, and he had not had the money for proper staff in years. He did not write in so many words that he had used her, but it was there between every line. He wrote about the debt, which had begun with a failed investment and grown in the way that debt grows when you ignore it, steadily, quietly, and then suddenly too large to ignore. He wrote about the decision to sell, which he described as the only option remaining, and about his difficulty in telling Nora, which he admitted, never actually managed to do. He had meant to. He had written the beginning of several conversations in his head. In the end, she had found out from Mrs. Tallow the week before the solicitor had filed the transfer paperwork. He wrote about her face when she came to his room that evening. He wrote about this in 3 sentences, and then did not return to it. At the end, he wrote, "She has never been a dependent or a servant. She has been the keeper of this house in every way that mattered, from the time she was old enough to hold a ledger. She knows Aldenmere better than I have known it for 20 years, perhaps better than I ever did. I am asking you, whoever you are, to see her clearly, not as something that came with the property, as what she is. Her name is Nora Weston. She is my daughter. She was born here, and she has cared for this place her whole life. I am sorry I could not do better by her. I am asking you to do better." Declan set the letter down on the bedside table. He sat in the dark for a while, listening to the wind and to the house settling around him the way old houses do. He thought about the inventory, page 31, between the candlesticks and the drainage easement. One household dependent, female, currently residing in the East Wing. Status to be determined by new owner. He thought about a girl of 6 losing her mother in a house this size, and a father who had kept her on not out of love, though perhaps there had been love somewhere under the guilt, but out of convenience, and had called it provision. He thought about ink-stained fingers and columns of numbers in a cold kitchen at 7 in the morning. He thought about the way she had said all my life, without bitterness, without appeal, as a fact, as the plainest fact there was. He found her in the kitchen garden the next morning. She was staking up some kind of climbing plant along the far wall. Beans, he thought, or possibly sweet peas, and she did not turn around when she heard him on the gravel path. She had heard him. He could tell by the slight change in her movements, a small, controlled self-possession that he was beginning to understand, her resting state. "Miss Weston," he said. "Good morning," she said, without turning around. He stopped a few feet away. The garden smelled of turned earth and something green and sharp that he couldn't name. The morning light was low and came in gold over the top of the garden wall and lay across everything in long stripes. "I spoke with Mr. Featherwick yesterday," he said. She tied off the stake she had been working on. Her hands were steady. "I know," she said. "He told me he would be coming. He gave me a letter. From your father." She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned around, and he saw her face clearly for the first time in full light. She looked, he thought, like someone who had been waiting for a verdict for a long time, and had already made her peace with whichever way it went. "He wrote to me as well," she said. "Last year, before he became too ill." She paused. "He told me he had left a letter with the firm, that whoever bought the house would be told who I was. She looked at the garden wall. He said he was sorry. In his own way. Were you here? Declan asked. When he sold the estate? Yes, simple. No elaboration. Did you know what was happening? She looked at him directly. I found out too late to change anything, she said. Which may have been intentional. I don't know, she paused. He wasn't a cruel man. He was simply not a particularly courageous one. The morning light moved as a cloud went over. The garden went cooler. I want to ask you something, Declan said, and I'd like an honest answer. I'll try, she said. Not of course. Not the reflex politeness of someone who has learned to perform agreeableness. Just, I'll try. You've been managing this estate, he said. The accounts, the garden, the household records, essentially on your own for years. You know this place better than anyone alive. She waited. I need someone who knows it, he said. I'm a stranger here. I bought a house I'd seen in photographs, and I've spent the last 10 days trying to understand what I've actually acquired. He paused. I would like to offer you a formal position. Estate manager. A proper salary, proper terms. Not what you've been doing, which seems to have been everything with nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. He could not read her precisely. She was not simple to read. You've read my father's letter, she said. So you know I have no claim here. I know that legally, he said. But your father was right, and I'd like to do better than he did. He paused. If you're willing. Something shifted in her face, not a dramatic shift, not tears, not relief with its full weight. Just a small, quiet change, like a room that has been airless for a long time and someone has opened a window. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. He had expected nothing less. She came to find him 3 days later. He was in the library, working through the maintenance records she had pointed him to, which were detailed and extremely useful, and written in a handwriting he now recognized as hers, going back 6 years. He looked up when she came in. She stood in the doorway with the same composed stillness she brought everywhere, and then she came in and sat across the table from him, which was, for her, a gesture of some significance. She had never done it before. She had always stood or sat slightly apart, maintaining the careful distance of someone who has learned to take up very little room. I have conditions, she said. All right, he said. The kitchen garden stays under my management. I've been running it for 4 years, and I know what it needs. Of course, the household accounts will be audited properly before I sign off on the current balance. There are discrepancies from the period before I took over the management, and I won't have my name on figures I don't trust reasonable. And, she paused, just briefly, I want it known what my role here is, not household dependent, not assists where needed. I want my name on the letterhead. I want the staff to know who they're answering to. She met his eyes. I've been managing without the title for years. I would like to stop doing that. He looked at her. He thought about a woman who had lived her whole life in a house she could not call hers, doing work she could not claim, holding a name that had no weight. Done, he said. She nodded once, tightly, and then stood up to leave. She was almost at the door when he said, One more thing. She stopped. The east wing, he said. Those are your rooms. They stay yours. I don't care what the inventory said. She stood with her back to him for a moment. The light in the library was gray and late, and the larches outside the window were moving in the wind. Thank you, she said quietly, and then she went out. His mother arrived in October, which was earlier than expected, and without warning, which was entirely characteristic. She was a small, fierce woman named Declan Ashby, who had raised 3 children in a terrace house in Glasgow, and had opinions about everything, particularly about her eldest son spending his savings on a crumbling estate in the Highlands and then refusing to discuss it. She arrived with 2 suitcases, a hamper of food she had made herself because she did not trust the countryside to provide, and an assessment that took approximately 45 minutes to develop but was, when delivered, comprehensive. "The roof needs seeing to," she said at dinner. "I know," he said. "The east wing is in better repair than the rest. Someone's been caring for it. Someone has." His mother looked at him over her wine glass. "The young woman who showed me to my room," she said. "Nora. She knows this house. She does. She walked through the front hall like she'd walked it 10,000 times." Eileen set down her glass. "Who is she?" he told her. "All of it. The inventory, the letter, the father, who had sold the estate without telling his daughter, the years of unpaid management, the careful conditions she had set before agreeing to stay." His mother listened without interrupting, which was unusual. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She agreed to stay? She did. After all that, after all that." Eileen looked out the window at the dark gardens. "She loves this house," she said. "It was not a question. I think she does. And what do you think of her?" He picked up his glass. He considered answering carefully and decided against it. "I think she's the most competent person I've ever met," he said. "And I think she's been invisible her whole life and has made a kind of armor out of it." His mother smiled. It was small and private, and she directed it at her wine. "Well," she said, "mind you don't make her feel like furniture." He thought about the inventory. Page 31. "I'm trying," he said. What changed between them happened the way most real things happen, gradually, and then in a way that was impossible to pinpoint after the fact. It was the morning she found him in the library, having pulled the wrong stack of land deeds from the wrong shelf, and muddled the filing system she had maintained for 6 years. She stood in the doorway looking at the mess with an expression of quiet suffering, and then came in without a word and began sorting. And he apologized. And she said it was fine in a tone that suggested it was not quite fine. And he said he would let her teach him the system. And she looked at him sideways, as though gauging whether he was serious. He was serious. She taught him. It took 3 mornings and involved several moments where he made a categorization error, and she corrected him with a precision that he found unexpectedly very funny. Not the correction, but the careful way she contained her exasperation, which was visible only in a slight tightening around her eyes. "You're trying very hard not to say I'm wrong," he said on the second morning. "You're not wrong," she said. "You're just not using the right system." "Is there a difference?" She looked at him. Something in her face broke open just slightly, not into warmth exactly, but into something adjacent to it. "In this library," she said. "Yes." He laughed. It surprised her. She looked away, but not before he saw the corner of her mouth move. It was November when the letter arrived from Harwick Crane. Harwick Crane was, according to Mr. Featherwick, a distant cousin of the late Lord Aldenmere, who had expected to inherit the estate and had been surprised, not entirely pleasantly, to discover that it had been sold before the death. He had engaged a solicitor of his own and had been exploring, for the past year, whether there were any grounds to challenge the sale. There were not. Mr. Featherwick had been clear about this from the beginning, and the new solicitor's letter, when Declan read it, was more bluster than substance. A lot of language about entailment and prior claims and the obligations of hereditary property, none of which applied cleanly to a barony that had been dissolved by debt. He showed the letter to Nora because she had a right to see it. She read it standing at the library table, holding it with both hands, and he watched her face go very careful and still the way it did when she was managing something she did not want to show. "He has no claim," he said. "No," she agreed. "The solicitors are agreed on that. Yes." She set the letter down. She looked at it for a moment, with the expression of someone who has been bothered by something for a long time and is tired of it. "Harwick came here twice when my father was ill," she said, walking through the rooms, making notes. "He didn't speak to me directly. I think he assumed I was the housekeeper." She paused. "He assumed it, or he chose to." Declan looked at her. He knew who you were. He knew who I was, she said quietly. He simply decided it didn't matter. She picked up the letter again and held it out to him. Your solicitor should respond firmly and quickly. The longer it sits, the more weight it appears to have. He took the letter. I'll call him this afternoon. He paused. Is there anything else? Anything Crane said to you directly, or did anything when he was here? She considered this with the care she brought to everything. He told me, on his second visit, that I ought to start thinking about where I would go, that the house would likely be changing hands and I should make arrangements. She said this without visible emotion. I told him I had already made them. Had you? She met his eyes. I had decided I was not leaving, she said. That was an arrangement. He stood there in the library with the November light coming through the tall windows and looked at her, at this woman who had decided with no legal claim and no formal title and no protection but her own will, that she was not leaving her home, and felt something shift in him that he did not immediately have words for. Good, he said. Then there's nothing more to discuss. Harwick Crane came in person in December. He arrived with a solicitor of his own and an air of aggrieved entitlement that filled the entrance hall like weather. He was a tall man in his 50s with the manner of someone who has never had to work particularly hard and resents those who have. He shook Declan's hand with the particular firmness of someone establishing dominance and looked around the entrance hall with the proprietary attention of someone who had come to collect something. Nora was in the hall when he arrived. She had just come in from the kitchen garden with mud on her boots and was pulling off her outdoor gloves, and Harwick Crane looked at her and looked away, the way he had apparently always looked at her, registering her presence without acknowledging it, categorizing her as irrelevant. Declan watched this happen. He watched Nora's face, which gave nothing away. He said very clearly, Mr. Crane, I believe you know Miss Weston. She manages the estate. Harwick Crane turned back to look at her. He looked at her differently now, recalibrating, and not comfortably. Miss Weston, he said. Mr. Crane, she said. Her voice was even. Her boots still had mud on them. She looked, Declan thought, exactly like what she was, a woman who had been outside working and had not changed her plans for the arrival of a man she did not respect. The meeting with Crane's solicitor lasted 90 minutes and accomplished nothing on his side, which was the expected outcome. Declan's solicitor had been thorough. The sale stood. The transfer stood. Harwick Crane had no claim and no avenue, and by the end of the 90 minutes, no remaining argument that held. He left with the wounded dignity of a man who has lost something he never actually possessed. Declan stood at the window and watched the car go down the drive. Nora stood beside him, close enough that he was aware of her presence without looking. That's done, he said. Yes, she said. And then, after a pause, thank you for what you said when he came in. He looked at her. I told him what was true. She looked at the drive, where the car had long since disappeared behind the larches. People know a great many true things, she said, and choose which ones to say. He thought about that. He thought about a lot of things, standing at that window in December with the gray light coming in, and the house quiet around them. Nora, he said. He had not used her given name before. He felt her notice it. Yes, she said. He turned to look at her. She turned to look at him. Her face was composed and clear, and not without wariness. She had spent a long time being careful, and care did not dissolve all at once. I have a question, he said. All right, would you have dinner with me? Not formally, just dinner, in the small dining room. He paused, feeling slightly absurd. I'd like to have a meal with someone who actually knows this place, who isn't performing something. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her weighing it. Not him, he thought, but something else. Whether it was safe to stop performing something herself. Yes, she said. I'd like that. They ate in the small dining room that evening, which was warmer and less formal than the main one, and had a fireplace that actually drew properly, which Mrs. Tallow said was a miracle given its age. They ate what the cook, a woman named Mrs. Fife, who had 4 strong opinions about proper stock and shared them unprompted, had left for them, which was venison and root vegetables and a bread that was still warm from the afternoon. They talked about the estate, about the roof and the south field and the plans for the kitchen garden in the spring, about the library and what to do about the drainage problem, and then, gradually, about other things, about Edinburgh, about his years building the business, about her years building something that had no official name and was nonetheless real. She told him about learning the accounts at the kitchen table when she was 14. Her father across from her, with a pen in his hand, patient in the particular way of someone teaching a skill they hoped would make themselves unnecessary. She told him about her mother, or what she remembered of her, which was not enough but was something. A laugh, a particular way of pushing open the garden gate with her shoulder, the smell of the rosemary she had planted along the path that still grew there. He listened. He was good at listening, which was not something she had expected. At some point the fire had burned low and they had been talking for 2 hours, and she looked up and noticed the time, and something in her face did a small, involuntary thing that he interpreted correctly as surprise. That time had passed like this, that she had not been measuring it. "I should go," she said. "You don't have to," he said. And then, because she looked at him with the caution of someone who needs very precise language, "I mean only that you're not keeping anyone waiting. But yes, it's late. Go." She stood and gathered herself in the small way she had of collecting her composure when she'd let some of it go. She paused at the door. "Declan," she said, the first time. He felt it. "Yes, the rosemary along the garden path," she said. "It's getting overgrown. I've been meaning to cut it back." She paused. "I won't." He looked at her. He understood. "Good," he said. "Let it grow." Spring came, and with it the London relatives, the estate lawyers, the question of the formal restoration of Nora's parentage in the public record, which Mr. Featherwick said was achievable, and Declan said was necessary. And Nora said she would like to think about, which she did, for 3 weeks, and then agreed to. The paperwork was filed in April. It confirmed what had always been true, that Nora Weston was the legitimate daughter of Reginald Weston, 3rd Baron of Aldenmere. It gave her the name in print that she had carried in fact her whole life. It did not give her the estate, which had been sold and stood sold, but it gave her something that could not be taken away by sale or debt, or a man deciding her presence was irrelevant. Mrs. Tallow, who had worked at Aldenmere for 26 years and had seen a great deal, read the notification in the letterhead with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for something to be confirmed and feels no need to say so. The staff who had not known, some of the younger ones who had come after the sale and never thought to ask, adjusted quickly, as people do when a thing becomes obvious in retrospect. And the kitchen garden came in, that spring, better than it had in years. Something about the winter pruning, Nora said, and the change in the drainage after they'd had the south field seen to. She walked the rows in the morning before the rest of the house was up, in the low clear light, and sometimes Declan came out to find her there and handed her a cup of coffee without being asked, because he had learned how she took it, and she had stopped being surprised by this. He asked her in June, plainly without performance, in the kitchen garden, because that was where they were. She said yes, also plainly. They were married in September at the small church in the village, with Mrs. Fife's opinions about the wedding breakfast firmly incorporated into the menu, and Mrs. Tallow in a hat that she wore with the satisfied expression of someone who has outlasted all the regimes, and has at last found one she can respect. His mother cried, which she denied afterward, and which everyone had the good sense not to mention. Aldenmere House stood, as it had stood for 200 years, at the end of the long drive behind the larches. In the east wing, the windows were freshly painted. In the kitchen garden, the rosemary had been let go and grown thick and tall along the path, and in certain lights, when the wind moved through it, the whole garden smelled of something that had been there a long time. It smelled like it had always been tended, because it had.